28-year-old John Cheek was a hardworking man whose efforts were on the brink of paying off at the end of 1993. He had become the chief financial officer of a major real estate company fresh out of business school, and he already owned a home of his own in Memphis, Tennessee. He had spent the better part of 1993 working on a business deal that would take his company public, a move that would earn John millions of dollars in stock options and provide him with a six-figure salary. The large reward was not without large effort, however. John had spent the better part of 1993 working 18-hour days and traveling extensively, working on the details of the deal. He had just returned from a 3-day multi-city business trip and told a work friend that he had not slept in more than 72 hours. He had a business dinner on the night of December 2nd, at which he became slightly intoxicated. A co-worker dropped John off at his car, parked near the intersection of Poplar and Ridgeway in Memphis. This was the last confirmed sighting of John. The next day, John did not show up for work, which was highly out of character for him. His 1987 Acura Legend was found abandoned near the Interstate 55 bridge over the Mississippi River. The immediate concern was that John had committed suicide by jumping into the river, but his family is adamant that he would not do that, and a subsequent search of the river did not locate John's body. There were unconfirmed sightings around the country shortly after John went missing, but a credible one did not occur until February of 1994. On Valentine's Day, a truck driver named Ron Jackson saw a missing persons flyer with John's picture on it at a truck stop in West Memphis, Arkansas. Ron believed that the man in the photo was a man he had met the day prior in Raphine, Virginia. On February 13th, Ron had seen a man he assumed was a drifter sleeping on a couch in the Raphine truck stop. Ron had woken the man up and offered to buy him breakfast, simply trying to be kind to someone who appeared to be down on his luck. Ron believed that there was something wrong with the man mentally, in part because he claimed to be living in an Arkansas homeless shelter, but was hundreds of miles away from Arkansas in Virginia. However, he did not think that the man was a typical homeless person. His clothes were clean and well cared for, and he spoke as though he had a high level of education. John's family was convinced that this was a true sighting of John when they heard that the man had been wearing a type of slip-on moccasin, consistent with the kind that John liked to wear. John's family subscribes to the theory that John had some sort of psychological break due to the stress of his job and is wandering the country, potentially unaware of who he is or where his home is. As John's whereabouts remain unknown, this remains an option. However, no other option can be ruled out either. John could have committed suicide, and his body was just never located. John could have been killed for his share of the earnings his company would have made after it went public. The company, Mid-America Apartment Communities Incorporated, has assets of almost $11.5 billion as of 2017, and brought in $1.5 billion in revenue that year alone. Until John or his remains are found, the truth about his disappearance will remain unknown. Ashley Heavy Runner Loring was a member of the Blackfeet Nation living on the Blackfeet Reservation near Browning, Montana. The 20-year-old had endured some instability in her life, but things had worked out in her favor. She and her older sister Kimberly had spent several months in foster care as children, while their mother battled substance abuse. The sisters ultimately were allowed to live with their grandparents on their horse ranch, where they learned to ride and spent their summers swimming in a nearby creek. In 2017, Ashley was completing her studies at Blackfeet Community College and planning to finish her degree at the University of Montana. To do so, Ashley was going to move in with Kimberly in her apartment in Missoula, Montana. Kimberly had moved to Missoula after getting a well-paying job working with senior citizens. Ashley had to wait to move, however, until Kimberly returned from a vacation in early June. Upon her return, Kimberly was not able to contact her sister. She was not able to find her at her home either. Ashley had vanished. The exact day of Ashley's disappearance, as well as her movements prior to it, are not known. The last time her family remembers seeing her was in early June 2017. The Bureau of Indian Affairs told Ashley's family that she was an adult and had probably gone off to live on her own somewhere. Her family did not believe this to be the case, since Ashley was close with her family and would not have cut off communication with them. She also had been waiting 3 months to be able to move in with her sister. If she really were that anxious to leave the reservation, she would not have agreed to the arrangement she had with Kimberly. The Loring family has not had consistent assistance from law enforcement in the search for Ashley. The effort is largely headed by Kimberly. After Ashley went missing, Kimberly quit her job and moved back in with her grandmother on the reservation so that she can search for her sister. The Blackfeet Reservation is covered in missing persons posters made by the Loring family. Kimberly searches social media posts and follows up on every rumor or hypothesis she hears about her sister's case. The most time-consuming and dangerous aspect of Kimberly's activism on behalf of her sister is the physical searching she does. Kimberly organizes and leads grueling searches almost every other day. She and whatever family members are available on any given day cover rugged and remote territory, armed with bear mace and shotguns to protect themselves. "I'm the older sister. I need to do this," Kimberly told the Associated Press. "I don't want to search until I'm 80, but if I have to, I will." In March of 2018, the FBI took over as the lead investigating agency on the case, replacing the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Ashley's disappearance remains unsolved. Kevin Hicks lived with his family in Croydon, in South London. The 16-year-old was described as a happy teenager who had no problems at school or with his grades. On Sunday, March 2nd, 1986, he left home at approximately 8:30 p.m. He told his mother that he needed eggs for a home economics exam the following day. He left home with only £1 to head to the Sperring store just a few minutes away, on Lower Addiscombe Road. At approximately 10 p.m., an hour and a half after Kevin left home for his quick errand, a friend saw him on Shirley Road, heading in the direction of his house. This person would be the last to ever see Kevin. That same night, Derek Hicks, Kevin's father, had a work emergency and had to leave home at 9 p.m. to handle it. When he arrived back at his house at 11, Kevin was not yet home. Since Kevin was a courteous son who would call if he were going to be late, Derek went out again to drive around looking for Kevin. Friends of Kevin's were called, and then the police. The following morning, police went to the John Ruskin School, where Kevin was a student. None of his friends or classmates could tell them where he was. The police also went to the Sperrings to inquire about Kevin's trip there. Unfortunately, the security camera in the shop did not have a tape in it the night Kevin went missing, and the staff could not remember if Kevin had been there or not. As such, it is unclear if Kevin ever made it to the store, or if that really were his intended destination. Investigators performed extensive searches of nearby parks and metro stations, but were unable to locate any sign of Kevin. The case ultimately went cold. On October 25, 1996, an anonymous caller left a voicemail message at the offices of the Croydon Advertiser and claimed they knew the location of Kevin's body. Police were unable to trace the call, and the lead went nowhere. In 2016, the Metropolitan Police announced a £20,000 reward for information in Kevin's case. They also indicated that they believed that Kevin was murdered the night he went missing, and that they were looking to recover his body. Kevin's mother passed away from a brain tumor in October of 1994. His father passed away 10 years later. Kevin's younger sister, Alexandra, continues to search for information about what happened to her brother. In 1983, Mary Emma Hammond was a 25-year-old newlywed, living in a townhome on Elgin Street in Brantford, Ontario. On the morning of September 8th, she left home at 3:30 a.m. for her shift at the Buns Master Bakery, roughly a mile away. Her husband of 4 months, Larry, offered to drive her, but she decided to walk. At 4 a.m., one of Mary's coworkers called Larry to inquire about Mary's whereabouts. She had not made it to the bakery. The police were called to investigate. They were able to trace Mary's footprints on her route to work up until the bakery's rear property line, where Mary would have had to cut across a field to get to the entrance. While there was no sign of Mary herself, some of her possessions had been left behind, including one of her socks, a half-eaten apple, and a dish from her packed lunch. Ominously, police also located a small amount of blood at the scene. The only lead police were able to uncover at the time of Mary's disappearance was a truck seen parked behind the bakery around the time she vanished. It was an older model brown truck, potentially a Ford, with a painted bumper and round headlights. No solid link between the truck and Mary's disappearance has ever been made, and the truck and its driver were never located. Brantford police reopened the case in 2012, but as of 2018, Mary's disappearance remains unsolved. In 1973, 21-year-old Henry Baltimore Jr. was a junior at Michigan State University in Lansing, Michigan. He was a drum major at the university and was studying music. His family described him as lively and fun-loving, but also as a natural leader. He had an apartment with 2 roommates in Lansing and seemed to have everything going for him. Unfortunately, that would change in March of 1973. On March 3rd, Henry was robbed at gunpoint by 2 men in his apartment. He was tied to his bed while the 2 men stole $110 in cash, a golf bag, some clothes, and a watch. Henry did not immediately report the crime because the 2 men threatened him. 10 days later, after his father convinced him to change his mind, he finally filed a police report. It is believed that Henry knew the men because they were quickly arrested. One of the men involved in the robbery had never been publicly identified, but the other was named Roy Davis, who was a 22-year-old from Flint, Michigan. Henry was scheduled to testify against Davis at a preliminary hearing after Davis was charged with armed robbery. Davis returned to Henry's apartment on multiple occasions to threaten him in order him not to testify. Henry did not appear in court as scheduled. The obvious conclusion would be that Henry, still fearful over the threats made against him, did not show up out of concern for his physical safety. According to the Baltimore family, Henry had in actuality been absent from court that day because one of his family members had a medical emergency. The court did not care what the reason was. A warrant was issued for Henry for his failure to appear in court, and he had to pay a $50 fine. On May 30th, Henry's sister Laurel, who was a graduate student at Michigan State, went to Henry's apartment. She had agreed to type a final exam paper for him and needed to pick it up. Henry was not home. He would never be seen again. Henry had been rescheduled to testify in court just 2 days after he went missing. The 2 obvious theories in Henry's disappearance tie back to the criminal trial. Either Henry ran away to avoid testifying out of fear that the men who robbed him would hurt him in retaliation, or the men did something to him before he had another opportunity to testify. It would have been difficult for Henry to leave of his own accord, as he left behind all his possessions, including his vehicle and all of his money. Roy Davis reportedly was heard banging on Henry's apartment door the day he went missing. Davis eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in the robbery and served 6 months in jail. He has never been charged with any crime in relation to Henry's disappearance. Both of Henry's parents and 2 of his 7 siblings have since passed away, never learning what happened to Henry. Henry's disappearance remains the East Lansing Police Department's oldest cold case. Phoenix Coldon was a gifted young woman. Her family described her as responsible and intelligent, and she had an inquisitive mind. She excelled in numerous areas, from athletics to the arts. She was a regional champion in fencing, and she played numerous musical instruments, including the guitar, violin, and piano. Homeschooled for most of her early education, she had enrolled at the University of Missouri at St. Louis to work towards her bachelor's degree. On December 18, 2011, 23-year-old Phoenix attended church and went food shopping with her parents before returning to their Spanish Lake, Missouri home in the early afternoon. Around 3 p.m., her father Lawrence saw Phoenix sitting in her car on her phone. This was not unusual behavior for his daughter. A few minutes later, he noticed that Phoenix had driven off. This was somewhat unusual. Phoenix would usually let her parents know where she was going before leaving the house. However, Lawrence assumed that his daughter was going off to see a friend or visit the neighborhood convenience store. By midnight, however, Phoenix's parents realized that something was wrong. Phoenix has not been seen since she left her driveway that day in December. The investigation into her disappearance has been problematic since the beginning. The Coldon family has publicly alleged that both the police and the local media have not taken Phoenix's disappearance seriously because she is Black. The lack of cooperation in the immediate aftermath of Phoenix going missing has potentially resulted in evidence being lost. When Phoenix's family finally received a concrete clue about where she had gone after she left her home, it did nothing to assuage the fears they had for Phoenix's safety. At 5:30 p.m. the day Phoenix disappeared, her black 1998 Chevy Blazer had been found in an unsafe area of East St. Louis. The car was running, and the driver's side door was open. Left in the car were Phoenix's glasses, shoes, purse, and identification. The car was towed by the police. Phoenix's parents would not learn that the car had been found until January 2nd, when a family member was able to track it down. Not receiving the help they needed from authorities, Goldia and Lawrence Coldon have had to rely on private investigators heavily in their fervent search for their only child. They have tracked down every lead they have received, even some that have turned out to be cruel hoaxes. Unfortunately, the Coldon family home was foreclosed upon a few months after Phoenix vanished, when Goldia and Lawrence had to use their mortgage budget to cover the costs of their search. After Phoenix went missing, it was discovered that she had not taken classes in the fall semester. This could indicate that Phoenix had some sort of stressor in her life that she had chosen not to share with her family. The state Phoenix's vehicle was found in obviously points to her being the victim of some sort of violence, potentially pulled out of her car and taken somewhere against her will. It remains unclear if she was the victim of random violence or an attack rooted in her personal life. 39-year-old Billy Oliveira lived in Nahiku, Hawaii, on the island of Maui. Billy had been raised by his grandparents and legally adopted by them when he was 16. By 2015, his grandfather had passed away, but Billy remained close with his grandmother and continued to live with her. At approximately 10:30 p.m. on July 13th, Billy and his grandmother heard a vehicle pull up outside their house. Because the vehicle was so loud, his grandmother assumed it was a truck. Billy went outside to see who had stopped by. Billy's grandmother did not realize that this would be the last time she saw her grandson. Billy never came back into the house after going to investigate the arrival of the vehicle. Because of this, and the fact that the vehicle sounded like a truck, Billy's grandmother assumed that he had been picked up by one of his half-brothers. However, the following morning, another one of Billy's half-brothers arrived to pick him up for plans they had made. Billy's grandmother told him where she thought he was, and his half-brother left to pick him up at his brother's home. However, Billy was not there. No other family members had picked him up. Billy had left his cell phone inside when he had gone outside on the night of the 13th, so his family could not call him or track his phone. The police would not allow the Oliveira family to file a missing persons report for several days. As such, the initial search effort was left to his family. The beautiful, lush foliage around Billy's secluded home made physically searching for him difficult, but his family did their best. They were eventually able to get assistance from Maui Search and Rescue, a volunteer organization on the island. The search dogs the group brought with them lost Billy's scent very close to his house. Billy's family has always maintained that he would not have vanished voluntarily, mainly due to the close relationship he had with his grandmother. Even as an adult, he remained courteous about sharing his plans with his grandmother. He would never go anywhere without telling her where he would be and calling to check in when he arrived. Furthermore, he was a homebody with few close friends, who preferred to stay in the familiar surroundings of his home and read. The unidentified vehicle that pulled up to the Oliveira house that night is obviously the clue that could solve the case. No one has ever come forward identifying themselves as the person who came to the house that night. This has increased suspicions that whoever was in the vehicle in some way harmed Billy. This remains merely a suspicion, as neither Billy nor his remains have ever been found. In 1964, 15-year-old Reed Jeppson was living what many would consider the ideal teenage life in Salt Lake City, Utah. He had just scored his first touchdown as a player for the East High School football team. He had a paper route and was careful with his money. He had 11 siblings and was always looking out for them. His father was a doctor, and his family regularly attended church. Reed loved the outdoors and spent his summers working on his family's ranch in Montana. He responsibly raised and trained German short-haired pointers to be bird hunting dogs. On Sunday, October 11th, the Jeppsons returned home after a morning spent at church. While some members of the family began preparing Sunday dinner, Reed changed from his church clothes into a pair of Levi's and had to go outside to feed and walk his two dogs. The two dogs, one adult and one puppy, were housed in a kennel in the family's backyard. Reed and the two dogs never returned home, shattering the Jeppson family's picturesque life. A friend reported seeing Reed walking the dogs near a school in the Jeppsons' neighborhood around 1 p.m. This is the last reported sighting of him. Reed's large family was able to conduct an extensive search immediately after he went missing, and they plastered the area with flyers. Their efforts did not lead anywhere. In May of 1967, Reed's older sister Suzanne thought she saw him in a car on Interstate 80. She took down the car's license plate and reported the sighting to the police. They followed up on the lead, but the person in the car was just someone who strongly resembled Reed. The Jeppson family has always maintained that Reed would not run away. There were no problems in his home life that would give him a reason to. Further supporting this claim is the fact that all of Reed's savings and belongings were left at his home. However, a logical scenario for how he went missing is hard to fathom. The athletic teenager would have been difficult to physically overpower and abduct. However, if he were involved in some sort of accident, his dog should have been located. It appears that someone else was involved in Reed and his dogs going missing, but the specifics of the role they played remain unclear. Reed's siblings have remained active in searching for their brother and keeping the police focused on it, even as the years since Reed was last seen have turned to decades. The Salt Lake City Police Department announced in 2010 that they were formally reopening the investigation into Reed's disappearance. Many of Reed's siblings were there for the announcement. They were also there waiting for news when, in 2012, authorities brought in cadaver dogs and a backhoe to search a gully behind Clayton Middle School. The dig was performed based on a tip. Even after digging 8 feet into the ground, police found no evidence relating to Reed's case. Reed's siblings have provided DNA samples to 2 missing persons databases. As of 2018, if Reed is still alive, he will be 69 years old. In 1993, 35-year-old Kathryn Adam was in the midst of a divorce. She and her husband Gerald had separated after a marriage that dated back to when Kathryn was just 18. Kathryn lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 16-year-old daughter in Salina, Kansas, and worked delivering hosiery to support them. On April 30th, Kathryn's daughter called the police to report her mother missing. On the morning of April 29th, Kathryn had visited a quick shop convenience store at approximately 4:30 a.m. to pick up a coffee and a newspaper, before filling her van with gasoline and starting work. The security camera in the store captured the last known picture of Kathryn. Her routine was to then go to a storage unit to load her white Ford van, which bore the Legs Company logo, with inventory for her day's deliveries. None of Kathryn's scheduled deliveries were made that day. Her van was discovered abandoned at 5:45 p.m. on April 30th. It was parked at Russell's restaurant, which had been closed for renovations at the time. The outside of the car was splattered with mud. Inside the car, there was a small amount of blood. Police discovered a larger amount of blood outside Kathryn's storage unit. Tests would later confirm that it was Kathryn's blood. The door of the unit had been left open, leaving them to believe that Kathryn had been attacked while she was in the middle of loading her truck for the day. The storage facility was fenced in, meaning that whoever assaulted Kathryn would have needed a way to access the gate. While the circumstances around her disappearance seemed to indicate foul play, Kathryn's body has never been recovered. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Curtis Pishon started his adult life with a lot of accomplishments. He got a job as a police dispatcher after he graduated high school, and eventually joined the Army and served with the military police in Korea. He obtained a bachelor's degree and joined the Concord, New Hampshire Police Department in 1983. In 1994, Curtis's public service career was cut short. He was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which ultimately left him without the dexterity to fire his service weapon with the required accuracy. The diagnosis and its consequences were devastating for Curtis. He became depressed and began drinking heavily. He began a career as a security guard to use some of his skills from his career as a police officer, while not being required to use a gun. He lost one security job after showing up for work intoxicated. He was hired to work third shift security at Venture Corporation, a factory that produced plastic automotive components in Seabrook, New Hampshire in 1998. He was able to successfully hold down that position and was still working there in the summer of 2000. At approximately 9:30 p.m. on July 4th, 2000, Curtis arrived at work. His shift started off as normal, and he made his routine check-in with his supervisor at midnight. The other employees at the factory all stated that he was behaving normally. The night took a dramatic turn at 1:42 a.m. on July 5th, when Curtis called the fire department to report that his car was on fire. The fire department was able to extinguish the fire, but the car was a total loss. Curtis was known to keep his valuables in his vehicle, which made the loss of the car even worse. Despite this, everyone who spoke with Curtis said that he seemed to handle the fire in stride. The factory's security supervisor spoke with Curtis at approximately 3:25 a.m., at which point he still seemed fine. When another employee arrived for work at 3:45, however, Curtis was not at his station. He has not been seen since. Curtis's recent health problems, the loss of his car and the possessions inside of it, and his forced career change could all point to him going off to commit suicide. His family does not support this theory. More recent developments in Curtis's case seem to discredit the suicide theory. Police have had a person of interest in the case since 2005. They believe that the car fire was set as a diversion. While there was no solid evidence of arson found in the vehicle, there was no indication of an accidental cause of it either. The night Curtis went missing, a vending machine and a change machine inside the factory were broken into using a company forklift. It has been speculated that Curtis could have walked in on this crime as it was happening. He subsequently could have been killed to ensure his silence. Curtis had previously spoken to his family about feeling unsafe at work because of illegal activities taking place in the factory's parking lot. Authorities have not been able to gather enough evidence to bring charges against anyone, however, and Curtis's case remains open.